Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at Dragon Age Veilguard. This is just going to be a totally candid, me kind of talking about some notes that I've jotted down. I've played about 8 hours or so, have used the photo mode extensively, and yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about it, so let's go. So first off, and I gotta say this, anytime a photo mode is in a game, just in the first place, very much appreciated. I'm so glad this is here at launch. I'm so glad that more developers are prioritizing getting this in the game. And yeah, it really makes a difference. And I gotta say, having a photo mode makes the enjoyment of the game just skyrocket for me, because it allows me to appreciate the environment art, appreciate the attention to details of props, of all the little things that the 3D modelers and designers and lighting artists, everything. It just makes it so much more fun. So right off the bat, just some design things in general. I think the character models look really good. I know I saw some people who were like, oh my god, it looks like Fortnite. Just because something has like a little bit more stylized, a little bit more cartoony, does not make it instantly a Fortnite ripoff or anything. You know, it's much more stylized than something that's going for like hyper photorealism, but I really like it. Some of the areas feel a little bit too sharp, or too, what I always say is like too crunchy. So a lot of like areas with a bunch of trees, it feels like it's almost too much is happening on screen at once, where like there's too many sharp edges, and you can kind of see here what I mean on some of these shots. So it can be a little bit painful on the eyes, but a little tip for that, try increasing the bloom slider on the photo mode. It softens things quite a bit, and I find that it helps a lot. Speaking of bloom, the game has this general like bloom glow effect kind of everywhere, and I don't mind it. It actually brings me back to Elder Scrolls Oblivion. I remember that had that same sort of vibe where the highlights were a little like blown out and a little softer, and yeah, it's kind of an interesting aesthetic. I know some people won't like it, but I like it. When it comes to performance mode versus fidelity, obviously fidelity is going to look better for photo modes, but I have found that in this game, it's not as much of a difference in other games. For instance, like in Avatar, Frontiers of Pandora, I found that it was quite a difference when you looked at them side by side. On this one though, I've taken multiple pictures, looked at them next to each other. There's not a huge difference. The only area I see a lot of performance versus fidelity difference comes in the puddles of water that are in certain areas. I took some like at the opening area here, and you can see how like the lights reflect a lot more naturally in fidelity compared to performance. So, you know, maybe flip on fidelity if you have an area with a lot of water, but you know, ray tracing isn't even active everywhere, so you know, sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. I also know that this game is getting a PS5 Pro enhanced version, and I've got my PS5 Pro coming in this Thursday, so we'll see what that does, if it changes anything. It'd be awesome to have fidelity mode with 60 frames per second. I'm really hoping that happens, but we'll just see. So the photo mode in general, it's serviceable. It's not the best thing ever. You know, there's no lights, there's no time of day, and that's a bummer. But one thing I really do like is the range is quite good. You can really pull the camera back, and especially for a game like this where there are so many just grand cities and structures and forests, it's nice to take it back. And then on top of that, it also can go really wide. This is kind of reminding me of Hogwarts Legacy, and you can just go so wide that sometimes it's laughable how much of the screen you can fit into one photo, but really appreciate that. One thing that's kind of hit and miss is the depth of field. I see a lot of games doing this style where like it's not a real depth of field happening like some games do it. It's more so that they're blurring at increasing distances. So you can kind of see, I'll show up on the screen what I'm talking about. Like, it's not necessarily accurate to how a camera would capture depth. It's more so just trying to like apply a blur. And honestly, sometimes it just feels really cheap, like how the iPhone will like attempt to, you know, make a portrait photo, but it's just like artificially blurring things. I really don't like that look. I think this was how they did it in Lords of the Fallen as well, but really don't love that. But sometimes it works, you know, if you have a longer millimeter count. So if you get up in like the 80s to 100, you can really get some differentiation between the subject and the depth, but you know, it's kind of hit and miss. Another thing is, don't sleep on the autofocus. It actually, first off, works quite well, but sometimes it works better than the manual when blurring things in the foreground. So sometimes you'll try and manually get things in focus far away, and say you've got like a tree or something in the foreground, and it won't blur it. But if you go into autofocus mode, it actually will blur the foreground much better. So try autofocus. A lot of times in this game, the light looks incredible. Like when you're in these forests and it's coming through the trees. And then also there's certain areas where there's natural lights that will accurately glow onto your character. Like I mentioned earlier, there's no placeable lights or anything like that, but you can find some natural spots to use to your advantage to create, basically like lighting setups. I've got one here of my character kind of near this red glowing thing, and yeah, it actually kind of worked as a nice little red highlight, so it's good. The environment variety is super wonderful. Like I said, I'm only like 8 hours into the game, so I know there are even more places I haven't been to, but from cities to like these underbelly streets to forests to these grand, structures of buildings and hallways to ruins, there's a lot to play with, and I really like that. No area gets boring. You can really kind of play around with it. So yeah, that's awesome. One thing that's great too is you can remove NPCs, enemies, character. That's super useful when you're just trying to focus on the environment. Or here's an example here of me doing like a little sword move on the ground, and look at the difference between having the enemy there looking all jank and honestly just not that very cinematic or natural, compared to me removing the enemy and just focusing on, my character doing that cool move with the sword. Other thing is the particle effects and the just kind of color choices and variety there is also really fun to play with. There's a lot of, it's a Dragon Age, so there's tons of magical elements. That really helps to give some of these action scenes a lot of flavor. Reminds me of Forspoken, where there's just a lot of color going on, and it looks really good. And the only real issues I've noticed with the photo mode, outside of just a wish list of like, I wish there was lighting, I wish there was time of day, whatever, but like glitch issues, is when you go to the page to adjust brightness and contrast and whatnot, sometimes when you go to the page, it'll just like decrease the contrast all the way. Like it'll just shoot it down. And if you use the photo mode, you will probably run into this. It's really easy though. When it does that, you just click square or whatever button that is on whatever you're playing on, and it'll reset the contrast back to normal. But yeah, sometimes you'll go over to that screen and it'll just like automatically, crank it all the way down. Anyway, keep an eye on that. Photo modes aside though, I am having so much fun with Dragon Age. I am really pleased with everything I've played so far. Haven't run into any big glitches, and a lot of the choices feel really fun. The character creator is amazing. I spent like probably 40-50 minutes in there. But yeah, overall great. I'll maybe do another video on this, doing a bit more of a formal photo mode after I've beaten the game, but wanted to get something out now just so people could take a look at it. And always appreciate when a photo mode's in a game. I'm really glad this one does, and it's definitely a game you're going to want to capture because it is pretty gorgeous at every turn. So until next time, have a good week.